Good morning. Page 98, Chapter 5. Poetry under a tombstone, truth under a stone. At the beginning of my camp career, I was very anxious to avoid general duties, but did not know how. When I arrived at Averbakh in the 6th year of my imprisonment, I had changed completely and set out at once to cleanse my mind of the camp prejudices, intrigues, and schemes, which leave it no time for deeper matters. So that instead of resigning myself to the grueling existence of a general laborer until I was lucky enough to become a trustee, as education people usually have to, I resolved to acquire skill there and then in Katorga. When we joined Baranyak's team, Oleg, Ivanov, and I, a suitable trade, that of a bricklayer, came our way. Later, my fortunes took a different turn, and I was for some time a smelter. I was anxious and unsure of myself to begin with. Could I keep up with it? Could I keep it up? We were unhandy, cerebral creatures, and the same amount of work was harder for us than for our teammates. But the day when I deliberately let myself sink to the bottom and felt it firm under my feet, the hard, rocky bottom, which is the same for all, was the beginning of the most important years of my life, the years which put the finishing touches to my character. From then onward, there seemed to have been no upheavals in my life, and I have been faithful to the views and habits acquired at that time. I needed an unmuddled mind, because I had been trying to write a poem for 2 years past. This was very rewarding, in that it helped me not to notice what was being done with my body, sometimes in a sullen work party, with Tommy gunners barking about me, lines and images crowded in so urgently that I felt myself borne through the air, overleaping the column in my hurry to reach the work site and find a corner to write. At such moments I was both free and happy. But how could I write in a special camp? Korolenko tells us that he wrote in jail, but how different his conditions were. He wrote in pencil. Why didn't they feel the seams of his clothes and take it away from him when he had carried it among his curls? Why wasn't his hair chopped? Wrote among all the noise. Excuse me. He ought to have been thankful that there was room to sit down and stretch his legs. Indeed, he was so privileged that he could keep manuscripts or send them out, and that is hardest of all for our contemporaries to understand. You can't write like that nowadays, even in the camps. Even saving names for a future novel was dangerous. The membership list of some organization, perhaps? I used to jot down only etymological root in the form of a common noun or an adjectival derivative. Memory was the only hidey hole in which you could keep what you had written and carry it through all the searches and journeys under escort. In the early days, I had little confidence in the powers of memory, and decided therefore to write in verse. It was, of course, an abuse of the genre. I discovered later that prose too can be quite satisfactorily tamped down into the deep hidden layers of what we carry in our head. No longer burdened with frivolous and superfluous knowledge, a prisoner's memory is astonishingly capacious and can expand indefinitely. We too have little faith in memory. But before you commit something to memory, you feel a need to write it down and improve it on paper. In the camps, you are allowed to have a pencil and clean paper, but may not keep anything in writing, unless it is a poem about Stalin, and unless you get a trustee's job in the medical section. or sponge on the cultural and educational section. You have to go through the morning and the evening searches at the guardhouse. I decided to write snatches of 12 and 20 lines at a time. Polish them, then learn them by heart and burn them. I made it a firm rule not to content myself with tearing up the paper, not to content myself. In presence, the composition and polishing of verses had to be done in my head. Then I started breaking matches into little pieces and arranging them on my cigarette case in 2 rows of 10 each, one representing units, and the other 10s. As I recited the verse to myself, I displaced one bit of a broken match from the units row for every line. When I had shifted 10 units, I displaced one of the 10s. Even this work had to be done circumspectly. Such innocent match games, accompanied by whispering movements of the lips or unusual facial expression, would have aroused the suspicion of stool pigeons. I tried to look as if I was switching the matches around quite absent-mindedly. Every 50th and every 100th time I memorized with special care to help me keep count. Once a month I recited all that I had written. If the wrong line came out in place of one of the 100th or the 50th, I went over it all again until I caught the slippery fugitives. In the Kubyshev transit prison, I saw Catholics, Lithuanians, busy making themselves rosaries for prison use. They made them by soaking bread, kneading beads from it, and coloring them, black ones with burnt rubber, white ones with tooth powder, red ones with red germicide, stringing them while still moist on several strands of thread twisted together and thoroughly soaked, and I too wanted to say my prayers with a rosary. And thoroughly soaked and letting them dry on a window ledge, I joined them and said that I too wanted to say my prayers with rosary, but that in my particular religion I needed 100 beads in a ring. Later, when I realized that 20 would suffice, and indeed made more convenient, I made them myself from cork, that every 10th bead must be cubic, not spherical, and that the 50th and the 100th beads must be distinguishable at a touch. The Lithuanians were amazed by my religious zeal. The most devout among them had no more than 40 beads. With true brotherly love, they helped me put together a rosary such as I had described, making the 100th bead in the form of a dark red heart. I never afterward parted with this marvelous present of theirs. I fingered and counted my beans inside my wide mittens at work lineup, on the march to and from work, at all waiting times. I could do it standing up. The freezing cold was no hindrance. I carried it safely through the search points in the padding of my mittens, where it could not be felt. The warders found it on various occasions, but supposed that it was for praying and let me keep it until the end of my sentence, by which time I had accumulated 12,000 lines, and after that in my place of banishment, the necklace helped me to write and remember. Even so, things were not so simple. The more you have written, the more days in each month are consumed by recitation, and the particularly harmful thing about these recitals is that you cease to see clearly what you have written, cease to notice the strong and weak points. The first draft, which in my case you approve in a hurry so that you can burn it, remains the only one. You cannot allow yourself the luxury of putting it aside for years, forgetting it, and then looking at it with a fresh critical eye. For this reason, you can never write really well, nor can you hang on to unburned scraps of paper for long. 3 times I was caught, and was saved only because I never wrote the most dangerous names in full, but put dashes in their place. Once I was lying on the grass away from everyone else, too near the boundary wire. It was quieter there, and writing, concealing my scrap of paper in a book. Senior warder Tatarin crept up behind me very quietly and saw that I was not reading, but writing. Right, let's have it. I rose in a cold sweat and handed it over. These lines were written on it. All we have lost will be made good. None of our claims will be denied us. The Osteroda Brudnitsy route was 5 weary days and nights on foot, with an escort of Kazakhs and Tatars behind us. If the words escort and Tatars had been written in full, Tatarian would have hauled me before the security officer and they would have found me out, but the blanks told him nothing, with a blank of K blank and T blank beside us. Our minds were running on different lines. I was afraid for the poem. And he had thought I was making a sketch of the camp area and plotting an escape. Still, even what he did find, he read with a frown. Certain words seemed to him suggestive, but what really set his brain working furiously was the phrase 5 weary days. I had overlooked its possible associations. 5 days was a set formula in the camp. When prisoners were consigned to the hole, who gets 5 days? Who's this all about? He asked, looking black. I barely managed to convince him by pointing to the names Ostrod and Brudnitsy that I was trying to remember an army song someone had written, but I couldn't recall all the words. Why do you want to do that? You are here to remember things? You aren't here to remember things, was his surly warning. If I catch you lying here again, you're in for it. When I talk about this incident now, it sounds trivial, but at the time, for a wretched slave like myself, it was an enormous event. I could never again lie on the grass, away from all the noise, and if Tatarin caught me with any more verses, they might easily open a new file on me and put me under close surveillance. But I could not stop writing now. On another occasion, I broke my usual rule. At the work site, I wrote down 60 lines of a play at one go and failed to conceal this piece of paper at the camp entrance. True, I had again left a number of discreet blanks. The warder, a simple flat-nosed young fellow, examined his catch with some surprise. A letter, he asked. A letter taken to the work site had a whiff of a black hole about it, but it would seem a mighty strange letter if they passed it on to the security officer. It's for a concert, I said, brazening it out. I'm trying to write down a sketch from memory. Come and see it when we put it on. The young man stared and stared at the paper and at me, then said, You're a bigger fool than you look. And he ripped my page into 2, 4, 8 pieces. I was terrified that he would throw the scraps, which were still large, in the ground there in front of the guardhouse, and they might catch the eye of some more vigilant staff member. Chief Disciplinary Officer Machikovsky himself was only a few steps away, looking on while we were searched, but they evidently had orders not to leave litter by the guardhouse, or they would have to tidy it up themselves. And the warder put the torn-up pieces into my hand as though it were a refuse bin. I went through the gates and made haste to throw them in the stove. On a third occasion, while it still had a sizable piece of a poem unburned, I was working on the disciplinary barracks, and the temptation to put the mason on paper was too strong for me. At that time, we never left the camp area, so that we did not undergo daily personal searches. When the mason was 3 days old, it went out in the dark even before before evening inspection to go over it for the last time and then burn it at once. I was looking for a quiet, lonely spot, which meant somewhere toward the boundary fence, and I forgot entirely that I was near the place where a tenor had recently gone under the wire. A warder who had evidently been lying in ambush grabbed me immediately by the scruff of my neck and marched me through the darkness to the black hole. I took advantage of the darkness to crumble the mason surreptitiously and toss it at random behind me. A breeze was beginning to blow, and the warder did not hear the paper crackling and rustling. I had quite forgotten that I still had another fragment of a poem on me. They found it when they searched me in the disciplinary barracks. Fortunately, it contained almost nothing that could incriminate me. It was a descriptive section from Prussian nights. The duty officer, a perfectly literate senior sergeant, read it through. "What's this?" "Tvardovsky," I said unhesitatingly. "Vasily Tyorkin." This was where Tvardovsky's path and mine first crossed. "Tvardovsky," said the sergeant, nodding his head respectfully. "And what do you want it for?" "Well, there aren't any books. I write down what I can't remember and read it sometimes." They took my weapon, half a razor blade, from me, but returned the poem, and they would have let me go. I wanted to run and find the mason. But by then the evening inspection was over, and no one was allowed to move about the camp. The warder took me back to the hut and locked me in himself. I slept badly that night. A gale-force wind had sprung up outside. Where would it carry the little ball of paper with the mason on it? In spite of all the blanks, the sense of the poem remained obvious, and it was clear from the text that its author was in the team building the disciplinary barracks. Among all those Western Ukrainians, it wouldn't be hard to find me. So that the work of many years, that already done, and that I was planning, was a scrap of crumpled paper blown helplessly about the camp or over the steppe. I could only pray. When things are bad, we are not ashamed of our God. We are only ashamed of Him when things go well. At 5 a.m, as soon as we rose, I went to the spot, gasping for breath in the wind. It was so strong that it swept up small stones and hurled them in your face. It was a waste of time even looking. From where I was, the wind was blowing in the direction of the staff barracks and the punishment cells. This place, too, was infested with warders, and there was a lot of tangled barbed wire. Then beyond the camp limits, onto the street of the settlement, I prowled around, bent double for an hour before dawn, and found nothing. By now I was in despair. Then when it got light, I saw something white 3 steps from the place where I'd thrown it. The wind had rolled the ball of paper to one side, and it had lodged among a pile of boards. I still consider it a miracle. So I went on writing. In winter in the warming up shack, in spring and summer on the scaffolding at the building site, in the interval between 2 barrel loads of a mortar, I would put my bit of paper on the bricks and, without letting my neighbors see what I was doing, write down with a pencil stub the verses which had rushed into my head while I was slapping on the last hotful. I lived in a dream, sat in the mess hall over the ritual gruel, sometimes not even noticing its taste. deaf to those around me, feeling my way above my verses and trimming them to fit like bricks in a wall. I researched and counted and heard it over the step, and all the time I saw the sets for my play, the color of the curtains, the placing of the furniture, the spotlight, every movement of the actors across the stage. Some of the lads broke through the wire in a lorry. Others crawled under it. Others walked up a snowdrift and over it. But for me, the wire might not have existed. All this time I was making my own long and distant escape journey, and this was something the warden could not discover when they counted heads. I realized that I was not the only one, that I was party to a great secret, a secret maturing in other lonely breasts like mine on the scattered islands of the archipelago, to reveal itself in years to come, perhaps when we were dead, and to merge into the Russian literature of the future. In 1956, I read the first small collection of Varlam Shalamov's poems in samizdat, which existed even then, and trembled as I thought, as though I had met a long-lost brother. Here he declares his willingness to die, like Archimedes during the siege of Syracuse. I know none better, this is not a game, or else a deadly game. But, like the sage, I'll welcome death rather than drop my pen, rather than crumple my half-written page. He too wrote in camp, keeping his secret from all around. Like me, expecting no answer to his lonely cry in the dark. A long, long row of lonely graves are all I remember now, and I should have laid myself there, laid my bare body down there, had I not taken a vow to sing and to weep to the very end and never heed to the pain, as though in the heart of a dead man, life yet could begin again. And how many of us were there, any more, I think, than have come to the surface in the intervening years? None, not all of them, were to survive. Some buried manuscripts in bottles without telling anyone where. Some put their works in careless or, on the contrary, in excessively cautious hands for safekeeping. Some could not write their work down in time. Even on the isle at Ch05, could we really get to know each other, encourage each other, support each other? Like wolves, we hid from everyone, and that meant from each other too. Yet, even so, I was to discover a few others in Ch05. Meeting the religious poet Anatoly Vasilievich Silin was a surprise, which I owed to the Baptists. He was then over 40. There was nothing at all remarkable about his face. A reddish fuzz had grown in place of his cropped hair and beard, and his eyebrows were also reddish. Day in and day out, he was meek and gentle with everyone, but reserved. Only when we began talking to each other freely and strolling about the camp for hours at a stretch on our Sundays off, while he recited his very long religious poems to me, like me, he had written them right there in camp. I was startled, not for the first time, or the last, to realize what far from ordinary souls are concealed within deceptively ordinary exteriors. A homeless child, brought up an atheist in a children's home. He had come across some religious books in a German prisoner of war camp and had been carried away by them. From then on, he was not only a believer, but a philosopher and theologian. From then on, he had also been in prison or in camp without a break, and so he spent his whole theological career in isolation, rediscovering for himself things already discovered by others, perhaps gone astray, since he had never had either books or advisors. Now he is working as a manual laborer and ditch digger, struggling to fulfill an impossible norm, returning from work and with bent knees and trembling hands. But night and day the poems which he composed from end to end without writing a word down in iambic tetrameters with an irregular rhyme scheme went round and round in his head. He must have known some 20,000 lines by that time. He too had a utilitarian attitude to them. They were a way of remembering and transmitting thoughts. His sensitive responses to the riches of nature lent warmth and beauty to its view of the world. Bending over one of the rare blades of grass which grew illegally in our barren camp, he exclaimed, "How beautiful are the grasses of the earth! But even these the Creator has given to man for a carpet under his feet. How much more beautiful, then, must we be than they? But what about love not this world and the things that are of this world," a saying which the sectarians often repeated. He smiled apologetically. He could disarm anyone with that smile. Why, even earthly carnal love is a manifestation of a lofty aspiration to union. His theodicity, that is to say, his justification of the existence of evil in the world, he formulated like this: Does God, who is perfect love, allow this imperfection in our lives? The soul must suffer first to know the perfect bliss of paradise. Harsh is the law, but to obey is for weak men the only way to win eternal peace. Christ's sufferings in the flesh he daringly explained not only by the need to atone for human sins, but also by God's desire to feel earthly suffering to the full. God always knew these sufferings, but never before had he felt them. Selim boldly asserted, even of the Antichrist, who had corrupted man's free will, perverted his yearning toward the one true light. Selim found something fresh and humane to say. The bliss that God had given him, that angel haughtily rejected. He nothing knew of human pain. He loved not with the love of men, but by grief alone is love perfected. Thinking so freely himself, Selim found a warm place in his generous heart for all shades of Christian belief. This is the crux, that though Christ's teaching is its theme, genius must ever speak with its own voice. The atheist's impatient refusal to believe that spirit could beget matter only made Selim smile. Why don't they ask themselves how crude matter could beget spirit? That way round, it would surely be a miracle. Yes, a still greater miracle. My brain was full of my own verses, and these fragments are all that I have succeeded in preserving of the poems I heard from Selim, fearing perhaps that he himself would preserve nothing. In one of his poems, his favorite hero, whose ancient Greek name I have forgotten, delivered an imaginary speech at the General Assembly of the United Nations, a spiritual program for all mankind. A doomed and exhausted slave with 4 number patches on his clothes, this poet had more in his heart to say to living human beings than the whole tribe of hacks firmly established in journals, in publishing houses, in radio, and of no use to anyone except themselves. Before the war, Anatoly Vasilievich had graduated from a teacher's college, where he had specialized in literature. Like me, he now had about 3 years left before his release to a place of banishment. His only training was a teacher of literature in schools. It seemed rather improbable that ex-prisoners like us would be allowed into schools, but if we were, what then? I won't put lies in children's heads. I shall tell the children the truth about God and the life of the Spirit. but they'll take you away after the first lesson." Dylan lowered his head and answered quietly, "Let them." And it was obvious that he would not falter. He would not play the hypocrite just to go on handling a class register rather than a pickaxe. I looked at him with pity and admiration, at his prepossessing man with ginger hair, who had known neither parents nor spiritual directors, for whom life was no harder in a kebab suit, turning over over the stony soil with a spade than it always had been elsewhere. Celine ate from the same pot as the Baptists, shared his bread and warm victuals with them. Of course, he needed appreciative listeners, people with whom he could join in reading and interpreting the gospel, and in concealing the little book itself. But Orthodox Christians he either did not seek out, suspecting that they would reject him as a heretic, or did not find. There were few of them in our camp except for the Western Ukrainians, or else they were no more consistent in their conduct than others, and so inconspicuous. The Baptists, however, seemed to respect Celine, listened to him. They even considered him one of their own. But they, too, disliked all that was heretical in him, and hoped in time to bend him to their ways. Celine was subdued when he talked to me in their presence, and blossomed out when they were not there. It was difficult for him to force himself into their mold, though their faith was firm, pure, and ardent, helping them to endure katorga without wavering and without spiritual collapse. They were all honest, free from anger, hard-working, quick to help others, devoted to Christ. That is why they are being rooted out with such determination. In the year 1948 to 50, several hundred of them were sentenced to 25 years imprisonment and dispatched to special camps for no other reason than that they belonged to Baptist communes. A commune is, of course, an organization. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.